Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Tumble Town, which is a 2020 board game designed by Kevin Russ and published by Weird Giraffe Games. This was actually a Kickstarter from earlier in the year, and it actually delivered quite a bit earlier than expected, which is quite a rare thing. It's a dice-driven, I suppose, family weight game where you are building your own little town or wild western town of these dice. As I said, it's a family weight game, so it's not overly complicated or complex, but it has quite a lot of interesting things going on in it. I suppose on the premise, it is a card drafting game where you have these 3 rows of cards. And those cards are made up of these different formations of buildings, and those buildings are constructed using dice. So you are going to choose one of those cards based on the rows, and that is not only going to take the card in your kind of unbuilt pile of buildings, but it's also going to allow you to take a bunch of resources. And those resources are the dice themselves. So you've got brown dice, which I suppose represents like wood, you've got your grey dice, you've got black dice, and you've also got the golden dice as well, which are kind of a wild resource or a more kind of lucrative resource. And whenever you take dice, you're going to roll them and kind of add them to your pool of resources, ready for the next phase where you're going to construct those buildings based on the criteria of the buildings you've just drafted. And those cards range from very simple things, such as only having kind of a couple of squares or a couple of dice next to each other, or can be quite extravagant in terms of taking five dice or so in order to build them. But not only are you restricted in terms of the coloured dice you need to build those buildings, but they can have further restrictions too. So they could have things such as, all the dice used in this building must be equal or odd, or they all must be different pip values, or they have to be pairs of dice, or have to come above a certain value or below a certain value. So you've got lots of restrictions you need to take into consideration when you draft these buildings in order to build them. But when you build them, you actually physically build them with the dice you've accrued throughout the game. And then you are going to place them on your own player board. And your own player board is kind of represents your little town, your little high street. And there's a bunch of different squares which kind of provide further restrictions or opportunities to score. For example, it might say, if you place a brown dice on this spot, you'll get an extra point at the end of the game. Or if you have a stack of at least 2 here, you'll get an extra point. Or if you have a stack of 3 here, you'll get an extra point. So not only are you trying to draft the dice based on or the cards based on the dice you have, you're also trying to build the buildings based on your formation of your town as well, in order to get as many points as you can. And once you build them, you are going to place the buildings that you've constructed onto your built side of your town, which not only gets you points at the end of the game, but will also give you lots of mitigation tools at your kind of that you can use at your whim, really, such as re-rolling the dice, or changing the pip values up and down, or up and down a few, or getting new dice into your pool, or transmuting one dice into another couple of dice. So as the game goes on and you're building more and more buildings, you've got the opportunity or an engine to really mitigate what you want with those dice to let you build the more expensive buildings, which is really cool. And that's pretty much the flow of the game. And at the end of the game, you can get points based on how many buildings you've built. You've got a secret objective at the start of the game, which gets you bonus points. You've got the additional points based on the actual physicality of your town, based on how many of those restrictions you're adhering to. So yeah, lots of points you can focus on. And the game is not overly long. It's you're only going to get, say, 7 or 8 buildings built. And the game basically ends when a couple of those dice colours are kind of gone down to a couple in the pool. So it's not overly long. It doesn't take too long. And you've got to weigh up, are you going to really focus on those, getting lots of cheap buildings out to try and, get as many bonuses as you can, and kind of trigger off your secret objective? Or are you going to go for those really expensive buildings that use all those gold dice? And not only are they worth more points, but they also give you more end game scoring options as well, such as get a couple of points for every pair of cactuses and bushes on your cards combined. So yeah, you've got all that different set collection methods going on, as well as the dice or taking your dice resource and taking your cards. So there's quite a lot of decisions that go on that tick along quite nicely in terms of constantly mitigating your dice to plan forward and draft the dice or draft the cards you want to fit that. And that's basically the flow of the game. It's very, very simple, but it ticks along nicely, and it's fast. It's satisfying in terms of the ultimately it's a game where you're rolling a bunch of dice throughout. But I love the extra element of being able to mitigate to quite a good degree. So it's very fun to do that. It feels quite satisfying when you are, really tailoring the dice you've taken to your needs. And you've also got to bear in mind as well that you can only ever carry 6 dice through from round to round. So you've got to be quite wary of the fact that you don't want to waste resources by not building something every round, because you could be just throwing dice away for the sake of it. So yeah, meaningful decision-wise, there is quite a lot to bear in mind, while still being quite breezy and simple to play. The balance of the game seems pretty good as well. I mean, are you going to, as I said, go for these lots of cheap buildings, or are you going to go for these more powerful ones? Are you going to really focus on getting your own buildings down? Are you going to maybe go for one of those more expensive buildings and then try and get as many set collection bonuses as you can off the back of that? So yeah, mechanically and rules-wise, extremely digestible, so simple. But the actual mechanisms themselves are broken down just to 2 very simple phases. Take a card from one of those rows and get your resources, rolling the dice that is, and then building any buildings you've collected beforehand. Obviously using all those mitigation tools at your behest, really, and then go straight onto the next round. The time investment, as I said, is great. I mean, it takes about half an hour to play this one. Just as you feel like you're getting an engine going and getting loads of capacity to smash those buildings out, then the game comes to an end, which is always good because it leaves you wanting more. Uptime, fantastic. A lot of the phases in the game can be played at the same time, so you're not waiting for someone to do their turn. The only thing is the actual card drafting order, but that's actually a good thing, because the actual turn angst of getting the buildings you want is quite palpable. Because turn order is great, because if you have a certain bunch of dice that fit a building really well, and that building's just sitting there ready for the taking, but someone's before you and they take that building off you, then very frustrating. So yeah, it's got a good that card drafting mechanism comes through nicely, and obviously turn order is important because of that. Replayability is really decent, because there is a ton of different buildings that come with the game, and quite a lot of them aren't used from game to game. So yeah, lots of variability there. As I said, the different strategies go down themselves, and so on. So yeah, replayability is good for a game of this weight. Interaction as well is pretty decent in terms of the card draft. I mean, everything else, there's not really much interaction, but you don't really want much more than that in a game like this. It's all about that card draft. That's where the player interaction lies. Aesthetically is something I'm in 2 minds about. So obviously this was a Kickstarter game, and it almost looks like quite obviously that it is. I think it's the cards themselves they're actually quite good quality, but I'm not too sure on the artwork on them. Don't get me wrong, I think it's very clear and it's very simple to see what dice are needed for those buildings. But it could have looked a little bit more refined for me. It could have looked a little bit more polished and professional. As I said, it does look a bit like a prototype version. Not only the building cards themselves, but also the player boards. They're a bit basic looking. It could have been a bit more vibrant and a bit more, a bit more cartoony, and just give a bit more feel of the game, and maybe increase its appeal a bit. But it's not a huge issue. I can't really complain about the functionality at all. I think they could have gone too far the other way and made it a bit more, obscure the simplicity of it a bit. But I just think it could have been a little bit smarter. Component-wise, though, the actual quality of the components is very good. It actually comes with a little dice tower, which is really good. It didn't have to do that. It's almost like a surplus, component. But you can't complain. It's always nice to have a dice tower. Obviously, you get a ton of dice for the games, and those dice are of a really good quality, to be honest. So yeah, no complaints there at all. Just the aesthetic could have been a little bit nicer for me. Theme-wise as well, I mean, I tend to like that kind of Wild West theme, and it works fine for this one. It is very much a skin. It could have been anything, but it works absolutely fine. And setup and teardown time is no issue at all. You're just taking a bunch of cards out based on the player count and setting out the kind of tableau of cards ready to play. So yeah, no real issue with setup and teardown at all. The progression of the game, I think, is extremely good because, as I said, when you're building more and more buildings, you are taking more mitigation tools to use. And additionally, when you start kind of filtering through those decks of cards as people draft them, and it comes to the bottom card, you'll start to take more resources, which speeds up the game and brings it to a bit more of an exciting climax as those orange or the golden dice become easier to obtain in order to get those big buildings. Scalability as well is really good. It's still quick at all player counts, as I said, because a lot of it is done. You can play the game together and you're not waiting for other players to take their turns. So yeah, scalability is done really well. And the game comes with quite a few different solo modes as well. Now, I haven't played them, but it looks like you can play against an AI. You can try to do like a beat your own score. And I think there's also scenarios as well. So they've put a lot of effort into making solo gamers happy with this one, which is always a nice touch. And I suppose comparison-wise, it's a dice game. It's almost like a pattern building dice game. There's quite a lot of those out there, but something like Sagrada kind of sings to me in terms of this one. You've got restrictions you can choose to ignore or choose to, I suppose Sagrada, you've got this kind of harder restrictions, but this one, you're still trying to use those dice to get as many points as you can with what you've got at your behest. So I do like that. And yeah, overall, this game was a huge surprise for me. I mean, it didn't get a lot of buzz, a lot of fanfare whatsoever. And it was an absolute delight to play. I really enjoyed this one. So breezy, but still really satisfying as you build these buildings. It's almost has a great table presence as well, and it has a nice tactical or tactile feel to it because you're actually physically building your own little town out with these dice, which is really cool. So I really do like that. In terms of family weight games, this is one definitely to check out. The only thing I'm concerned about is that I think this one's flown a little bit under the radar. I'm not quite sure of the retail availability of it, if it was backed by a lot of retailers, or if it is indeed going to retail at all, or if it's just the people who've backed the game are actually going to get to play this one. And obviously it'll go into the secondary market from there. But I think it'll be such a shame if this game doesn't actually get the attention it deserves, because while the aesthetic is, it's a bit Marmite, it's not a terribly beautiful game, but the gameplay itself is razor sharp. It is absolutely just put together to a great, in a great effort. Really, there's. I find with a lot of Kickstarter games, especially with less experienced designers, they you can see the cracks. You can see the kind of they're not as polished or as refined as they could be, and I think that's often a sign of inexperience. But this one, the gameplay itself is faultless. So I mean, if this is what you're looking for, then I cannot complain at all. But in the same vein, the aesthetic might hold it back a bit. But yeah, overall, this game, it was great. The thing that's impressed me most is that this is designed by Kevin Russ, who recently came out with Calico, which was quite a big hit, and it really did take off and get a lot of attention. Now, I think this one is going to be very much a kind of in the shadow of that. But taking that into consideration, I think that this designer has really laid a foundation to get my attention, at least in terms of these restrictive pattern building games. He's really kind of formed him or given himself a nice platform to build off in terms of getting at least my respect and my eyes on him in terms of what he's going to bring out next, because both of those games are very well streamlined, very accessible, but still extremely fun and just satisfying. So yeah, definitely a huge surprise for me, this one. Come out of the left field and just a really nice, pleasant family weight game. So this one definitely gets my seal of quality. Check this one out if you can. As I said, it's not going to be overly available, I think, but if you can get your hold on it and you do like that weight of games, then definitely check this one out. So that concludes my review of Tumble Town. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.